The auctioneer's hammer came down just as Inez Wade stepped onto the platform, and every eye in Broken Fork's dusty main square turned toward her. She had timed it poorly. The crowd pressed close, men in worn hats and women clutching shawls against the afternoon wind, all watching the saloon singer who had arrived 3 weeks ago with a trunk and a borrowed name. She kept her chin level, her hands loose at her sides, but her pulse hammered against her ribs. The auctioneer, a barrel-chested man with a silver watch chain, gestured toward a stack of crates stamped with her family's old freight mark, the mark her father had used before he vanished. Before the accusations started, a man's voice cut through the crowd from the left. "You selling stolen goods now, Wade?" The speaker was a rancher named Keller, his face red under his hat brim. Inez turned toward him, her expression calm even as her stomach twisted. "Those crates came through Denver, legally consigned." "I have the bills." Keller spat into the dirt. "Your daddy's bills don't mean a damn thing when half this town knows he ran off with HOA water shares that weren't his." She opened her mouth to answer, but another voice rose first, quieter and carrying more weight. "That's a hell of an accusation to make without proof, Keller." The crowd shifted, and a man stepped forward from the opposite side. He was lean and sun-browned, his sandy hair falling across his forehead, his coat dusty from the road. Jasper Pruitt. She had seen him twice at the edge of the Silver Ranch corrals, working a green horse with patience that made the animal settle like magic. He met her gaze for a single beat, his hazel eyes unreadable, then looked back at Keller. "If you have evidence, bring it to the marshal. Otherwise, let the woman conduct her business." Keller's jaw worked. "You defending her now, Pruitt? That's rich, considering your own reputation." Jasper's expression didn't shift, but his shoulders tightened under his coat. Inez felt the crowd's attention swing between them like a pendulum. She had no idea why this man had spoken for her, but the gesture was a knife edge. It could protect her or cut her open. She stepped down from the platform, her skirt brushing the crates, and looked at Jasper. "I appreciate the support, but I can handle my own trouble." He tilted his head slightly, a faint crease appearing between his brows. "Didn't say you couldn't. But trouble shared is easier carried." The auctioneer cleared his throat, nervous now, and waved for the next lot. The crowd began to disperse, but the murmurs stayed loud. Inez turned away, her heartbeat still high, and started toward the narrow alley behind the land office. Boots scuffed behind her. She glanced back. Jasper followed at a distance, his hands in his coat pockets, his gaze tracking the men who still watched her from the saloon porch. She stopped at the alley mouth and faced him. "Why did you do that?" He stopped 3 paces away, the wind tugging at his hair. "Because Keller's a bully, and you looked like you were about to take a swing at him in front of 50 witnesses. That would have ended poorly." She almost smiled. "I wasn't going to swing." He raised an eyebrow. "Your fist was clenched." She glanced down at her hand and uncurled her fingers. "Fine. Maybe I was considering it." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You're new here, so let me give you some free advice. Don't give them a reason to run you out. This town has a long memory and a short fuse." She met his eyes, searching for mockery or pity, but found neither. Just a flat honesty that felt like solid ground. "I didn't come here to be run out," she said. He nodded slowly. "Then you came here for something." That makes two of us." Before she could answer, a boy in a torn shirt ran up, breathless. "Miss Wade, Mr. Latimer says you're needed at the saloon. There's a man asking for you." The boy's eyes were wide. "Says he knew your father." Inez's stomach dropped. She forced her voice steady. "Thank you. Tell him I'll be there shortly." The boy nodded and ran off. Jasper watched her carefully. "You all right?" She straightened her shawl, buying a second to think. "I'm fine, just business." He didn't look convinced, but he didn't press. "If you need someone to stand at your back again, I'll be at the Silver Ranch through sunset." Then he touched the brim of his hat, a gesture so old-fashioned it caught her off guard, and walked away toward the corrals. She stood in the alley for a moment, letting the wind cool her face. She had come to Broken Fork because her father's name was buried here under lies, and because the only way to clear it was to find the real thief. The HOA water shares that had gone missing 5 years ago had destroyed her family. Her mother had died of shame and fever. Her younger brother had been sent east to relatives who barely spoke to them. And Inez had been left with a last name that opened no doors and a single letter from her father, written the week before he disappeared, telling her the truth was in Broken Fork and that she would have to be careful. So, she had come as a saloon singer, a role that let her listen without being questioned, a mask that hid her real purpose. But the mask was fragile. And now, a stranger was asking for her. And Jasper Pruitt had looked at her like he could see straight through the fabric of her lies. She walked toward the saloon, her boots stirring dust, and wondered which thread would unravel first. The saloon was called the Iron Spur, and it smelled like tobacco, whiskey, and old wood. Inez stepped inside, letting her eyes adjust to the dim light. The man waiting for her stood by the bar, his back to the door. He was older, maybe 50, with a gray beard and a coat that had seen better years. When he turned, his face was unfamiliar, but his eyes were sharp. "Miss Wade?" She nodded. He gestured toward a corner table. "Let's talk somewhere quieter." She followed, her pulse ticking faster. He sat with his back to the wall and waited until she settled across from him. "My name's Gideon Marsh. I worked freight with your father back in '71. Heard you've been asking around about him." She kept her expression neutral. "I have. Do you know where he is?" Marsh shook his head slowly. "No, but I know he didn't steal those water shares." Inez leaned forward slightly. "Then, who did?" Marsh glanced toward the bar, then back. "A man named Vaughn. He ran a supply house on the south end of town, had his hands in half the shipments that came through. Your father found discrepancies in the HOA ledgers and was going to report him. 2 days later, the shares went missing, and your father got blamed." Inez's throat tightened. "Do you have proof?" Marsh hesitated. "I have a ledger page. It's not much, but it shows Vaughn's handwriting next to altered entries. If you can match it to something current, it might be enough to reopen the case." "Where is it?" He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper, yellowed and creased. "I kept it because I thought someone would come looking eventually." He slid it across the table. "But you need to be careful. Vaughn's got friends, and if he finds out you're asking questions, he'll make sure you disappear like your father did." She took the paper, her fingers trembling slightly, and tucked it into her shawl. Thank you. Marsh stood, adjusting his hat. One more thing. There's a water rights meeting tomorrow at the land office. Vaughn's pushing a new agreement that'll give him control of the Eastern Creek access. If he gets that, he'll own half the valley. Your father was trying to stop him back then. Maybe you can finish what he started. He walked out before she could respond, leaving her alone at the table with a scrap of paper and a weight pressing on her chest. She sat for a moment, staring at the scarred wood, then rose and walked back into the sunlight. The square was quieter now, the auction over, the crowd scattered. She saw Jasper across the way, leading a roan horse toward the livery, his movements calm and sure. She wondered what he had meant when he said he came here for something. She wondered if his trouble was as deep as hers. That night, she sat in her rented room above the dry goods store and unfolded the ledger page by candlelight. The handwriting was careful, almost elegant, but the numbers didn't match the dates. Someone had changed the totals after the fact. If she could find a current document with Vaughn's writing, she could prove the pattern. But that meant getting close to a man who had already destroyed her family once. She barely slept. At dawn, she dressed in her plainest clothes and walked to the land office. The meeting was set for 10, but she arrived early, hoping to see the documents before the crowd gathered. The clerk, a tired-looking man named Burris, glanced up from his desk. "Help you, miss?" She smiled. "I'm interested in the water rights discussion today. I'd like to review the terms before the meeting." He hesitated, then shrugged and pulled a folder from a cabinet. "It's public record. Just don't take anything." She spread the papers on a side table and scanned them quickly. There, at the bottom of the third page, was a signature. Clayton Vaughn. The script matched the ledger page in her shawl. The same looping V. The same careful slant. Her heart kicked. She had it. Not enough to convict, maybe, but enough to raise questions. Enough to make people look again. Boots thudded on the porch outside, and the door swung open. 3 men stepped in, and the one in front was broad-shouldered, his face cold and watchful. Clayton Vaughn. He saw her at the table and stopped. His gaze flicked to the papers, then back to her face. "Miss Wade, didn't expect to see you here." She straightened, keeping her voice level. "I have an interest in the water agreement. I own property downstream." It was a lie, but a plausible one. Vaughn's mouth twitched. "That so? Funny. I don't recall your name on any deed." Before she could answer, another voice came from the doorway. "She's got as much right to be here as you do, Vaughn." Jasper stepped inside, his coat dusty, his expression hard. Vaughn's eyes narrowed. "This doesn't concern you, Pruitt." Jasper moved to stand beside Inez, close enough that she could feel the heat off his shoulder. "I'm making it my concern." Vaughn stared at them both for a long moment, then smiled without warmth. "Interesting company you're keeping, Wade. Hope you know what you're getting into." He turned and walked to the clerk's desk, his men following. Inez exhaled slowly, her hands steady now. Jasper glanced at her. "You want to tell me what that was about?" She kept her voice low. "Not here." He nodded. "Meet me at the creek east of town." 1 hour. Then he walked out, tipping his hat to the clerk as if nothing had happened. She folded the water rights document carefully, memorizing the signature, then left the land office and walked through town with her head high. The creek was a 20-minute walk, a thin ribbon of water that cut through scrub grass and cottonwoods. When she arrived, Jasper was waiting, his horse grazing nearby. He looked up as she approached. "You're in trouble." She met his eyes. "So are you, apparently." He almost smiled. "Fair enough. You first." She hesitated, weighing trust against risk, then pulled the ledger page from her shawl. "My father was accused of stealing HOA water shares 5 years ago. He didn't do it. Clayton Vaughn did. This page proves the ledgers were altered, and I just saw Vaughn's current signature. It matches." Jasper took the paper, studying it in the sunlight, then handed it back. "That's why you came here. To clear his name." She nodded. "And to find out what happened to him." Jasper was quiet for a moment, his gaze on the creek. "Vaughn's dangerous. If you go after him, he'll come after you." She folded the paper. "I know. So why are you helping me?" He looked at her then, his hazel eyes steady. "Because I know what it's like to carry someone else's shame. My father was a gambler. Lost the family ranch in a card game when I was 15. I spent the next 10 years rebuilding my name, working other people's horses, sleeping in barns. I came to Broken Fork because the Silver Ranch needed a trainer, and because nobody here knew my father's name. But reputations travel. Keller knows. Half the ranchers know. They're just waiting for me to fail, so they can say I'm my father's son." Inez felt something shift in her chest, a recognition that went deeper than words. "We're both here under borrowed time." He nodded. "So if we're going to take on Vaughn, we do it smart." "What do you need?" She thought for a moment. "I need to get into his office. There'll be more records, maybe correspondence that ties him to the theft. If I can find enough, I can take it to the territorial judge." Jasper rubbed his jaw. His office is above the supply house. 2 guards, usually. And he keeps the door locked. She smiled faintly. "Then we'll need a distraction." He raised an eyebrow. "You have one in mind?" She did. But it meant trusting him fully, and that was a step she hadn't planned to take so soon. Still, the way he had stood beside her twice now, the way he looked at her without judgment, made the risk feel smaller. "There's a poker game at the saloon tonight. Vaughn always attends. If you can keep him occupied, I can slip upstairs." Jasper considered. "And if you get caught, then I'll need you to get me out." He held her gaze. "That's a lot of trust to put in a man you just met." She didn't look away. "You put yours in me first." He nodded slowly. "All right. Tonight then. But if this goes wrong, we run. No heroics. Agreed?" She held out her hand. Agreed. He shook it, his grip firm and warm, and for a moment neither of them let go. Then he released her and stepped back. "I'll see you at the saloon." 8 o'clock. She spent the afternoon preparing. She changed into her saloon dress, dark green with a low neckline and lace trim. The kind of outfit that let her blend into the background while still drawing enough attention to seem harmless. She pinned her hair up carefully, leaving a few curls loose, and practiced the calm expression she had worn for 3 weeks. By the time the sun touched the horizon, she felt ready. Or as ready as she could be for walking into a snake den. The saloon was crowded when she arrived, the tables full, the air thick with smoke and noise. She saw Vaughn at a corner table, cards in hand, a stack of coins at his elbow. Jasper sat 2 tables over, nursing a whiskey, his eyes tracking the room. She caught his gaze for a single beat, then moved to the bar and ordered a glass of water. Latimer, the saloon owner, gave her a curious look. "You singing tonight, Inez?" "Not tonight," she said. "Just watching." She waited until Vaughn's game got loud, the players arguing over a hand, and then she slipped toward the back stairs. The hallway upstairs was narrow and dim, lit by a single lamp. Vaughn's office was the 3rd door on the left. She tested the handle. Locked, as expected. She pulled a hairpin from her bun and bent it, working the lock the way her father had taught her when she was 12. The mechanism clicked, and the door swung open. The office was small, cluttered with ledgers and loose papers. She moved quickly, scanning the desk first, then the filing cabinet. In the bottom drawer, she found a leather folder stamped with the HOA seal. Inside were letters, receipts, and a second ledger. She pulled out the ledger and flipped through it. There, in Vaughn's handwriting, were entries for the missing water shares, dated 3 weeks after her father disappeared. The shares had been sold to a buyer in Cheyenne, the payment routed through a false account. Her hands shook as she folded the pages and tucked them into her bodice. Boots thudded in the hallway. She froze. The door swung open, and one of Vaughn's men stepped in, his eyes widening when he saw her. "The hell are you doing in here?" She didn't answer, just bolted for the window. He lunged, grabbing her arm, and she twisted, bringing her elbow up hard into his ribs. He grunted and stumbled back. She threw the window open and climbed onto the narrow ledge outside, her skirt catching on the sill. Below, the alley was dark and empty. She heard shouts from inside the office, more footsteps. Then Jasper's voice, calm and cold. "Let her go, or I'll put you through that wall." She glanced back and saw him in the doorway, his coat open, his hand resting on the grip of a revolver at his belt. The guard hesitated. Vaughn's going to hear about this. Jasper's expression didn't change. He already has. "Now step back." The guard moved aside, and Jasper crossed to the window, reaching out a hand. Inez took it and let him pull her back inside. They ran together, down the back stairs and out into the alley, the night air cold and sharp. Behind them, more shouts erupted. They didn't stop until they reached the edge of town, where Jasper's horse waited in the shadows. He swung into the saddle and pulled her up behind him. "Hold on." She wrapped her arms around his waist, and he kicked the horse into a gallop. They rode east, away from the lights, into open country. The wind tore at her hair, and her heart hammered. But beneath the fear was something else. Relief. Triumph. They had done it. After a mile, Jasper slowed the horse and turned toward a shallow draw lined with cottonwoods. He dismounted and helped her down, his hands steady on her waist. "You all right?" She nodded, breathless. "I got it. The ledger, the letters, everything." He let out a slow breath. "Then we have a problem. Vaughn knows you took it. He'll come after you tonight." She pulled the folded pages from her bodice. "Then we take this to the marshal now." Jasper shook his head. "The marshal's in Vaughn's pocket, has been for years. If you walk in there, You'll be arrested before you can finish talking. Her stomach twisted. Then what do we do? He looked at her, his face shadowed, but his eyes clear. We take it to the territorial judge. He's due in Broken Fork tomorrow for the water rights meeting. If we can get this in front of him before Vaughn spins the story, we have a chance. She nodded slowly. Where do we go until then? He glanced around, then gestured toward the draw. We stay here. It's sheltered, out of sight. I'll keep watch. She wanted to argue, to say she could take care of herself, but exhaustion was pulling at her, and the thought of spending the night alone made her chest tighten. All right. They built a small fire in the lee of the hill, using dry brush and driftwood. Jasper unsaddled the horse and set the bedroll near the flames. Inez sat on a flat rock, the folded papers still clutched in her hand, and stared into the fire. Jasper sat across from her, his back against a tree, his revolver resting on his knee. You did good tonight. She looked up. So did you. Why did you risk it? He was quiet for a moment. Because you're trying to do something right. And because I'm tired of watching people get buried by lies. She studied his face in the firelight, the sharp lines softened by shadow, and felt the pull again, the same charge she had felt in the square when he first spoke for her. It was more than gratitude, more than alliance. It was recognition. Do you think it'll work? She asked. The judge, the evidence. Do you think it'll be enough? He met her eyes. I think if you walk in there tomorrow and tell the truth, people will listen. You're not your father's ghost. You're the woman who broke into Vaughn's office and lived to talk about it. That counts for something. She almost smiled. I had help. He shrugged. So did I. You could have left me behind at the saloon. You didn't. The fire cracked, sending sparks into the dark. She pulled her shawl tighter. Can I ask you something? He nodded. When you said you came here for something, what did you mean? He looked down at his hands. I came here to prove I'm not my father, to build something that's mine, not borrowed or bought with someone else's loss. The Silver Ranch offered me a chance to do that. But every time someone like Keller throws my father's name in my face, I wonder if I'm just chasing a reputation I'll never catch. She leaned forward slightly. You're not your father, any more than I'm mine. He looked at her, and something shifted in his expression, a softness that made her breath catch. Maybe. But it's easier to believe that when someone else says it. She held his gaze. Then believe it. Because I've seen you stand up twice now when you didn't have to, and that's not something a man does because of his father's mistakes. That's something a man does because of who he is. He didn't answer, but the look in his eyes was enough. They sat in silence for a while, the fire burning low, the night settling around them like a blanket. Eventually, Jasper stood and added more wood. You should sleep. I'll keep watch. She hesitated. What about you? I'll wake you in a few hours. We'll trade. She nodded and lay down on the bedroll, pulling her shawl over her shoulders. The ground was hard, but the fire was warm, and the sound of Jasper's breathing, steady and calm, eased the tension in her chest. She woke to a hand on her shoulder and Jasper's voice, low and urgent. Inez, someone's coming. She sat up, her heart pounding, and saw the fire reduced to embers. Jasper crouched beside her, his revolver drawn, his gaze fixed on the ridge above. She heard it then, the faint jingle of harness, the low murmur of voices. "How many?" she whispered. He shook his head. "2, maybe 3. Could be Vaughn's men. Could be the marshal. Either way, we need to move." They gathered their things quickly, Jasper kicking dirt over the embers while Inez rolled the bedroll. He led the horse quietly up the draw, away from the voices, and they climbed a narrow trail that wound through scrub and rock. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east, a thin line of gray above the horizon. They reached a flat outcrop and stopped, listening. The voices faded, moving south. Jasper exhaled. "They're searching, but they don't know where we are. Yet." Inez looked at him. "How long until the meeting?" 2 hours, maybe 3. He glanced at the sky. "We can circle back through the ravine and come in from the north. Stay off the main road." She nodded. "Let's go." They rode together again, her arms around his waist, the horse picking its way carefully over loose stone. The sun rose slowly, painting the hills gold, and Inez felt the weight of the folded papers pressing against her ribs. Everything her father had fought for, everything she had risked, came down to the next few hours. They reached the edge of town just before 9. The square was already filling with ranchers, townspeople, and HOA officials. Jasper dismounted and helped Inez down, his hands lingering on her waist for a moment. "You ready?" She straightened her dress and tucked a loose curl behind her ear. "No, but I'm doing it anyway." He smiled, a quick flash that warmed her more than the morning sun. That's the spirit. They walked together toward the land office, and heads turned. Inez felt the weight of every stare, every whisper, but she kept her chin up and her stride steady. Jasper stayed close, his presence a solid anchor. Inside, the room was packed. The territorial judge, a stern man named Calloway, sat at the front, flanked by the clerk and 2 HOA officials. Vaughn stood near the window, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. When he saw Inez, his jaw tightened. Calloway rapped his gavel. "Let's begin. The water rights agreement is on the table. Any objections, speak now." Inez stepped forward. "I have an objection, Your Honor, and evidence of fraud." The room went silent. Calloway's eyes narrowed. "State your name." "Inez Wade," she said clearly. "Daughter of Thomas Wade." Vaughn's expression hardened. Calloway gestured. "Proceed." Inez unfolded the papers and held them up. 5 years ago, my father was accused of stealing HOA water shares. He didn't. Clayton Vaughn did. These ledgers show altered entries in Vaughn's handwriting, and these letters prove the shares were sold through a false account. My father tried to expose the fraud, and he disappeared 2 days later. I believe Vaughn had him killed. The room erupted. Vaughn stepped forward, his voice cold. "This is slander. That woman broke into my office last night and stole private documents. She's a liar and a criminal." Calloway raised a hand for silence. "Miss Wade, how did you obtain these documents?" She met his gaze. "I took them from Mr. Vaughn's office. Without permission. But they are genuine, and they prove he committed fraud." Calloway leaned back, that puts us in a difficult position. Evidence obtained illegally is not always admissible. Inez's stomach sank. Jasper stepped forward. Your Honor, with respect, the question isn't how the evidence was obtained. The question is whether it's true. If Vaughn's ledgers match the HOA records from 5 years ago, the fraud is provable. And if it is, then everything he's built since then is built on theft. Calloway considered. Do you have the original HOA ledgers? The clerk spoke up. Yes, Your Honor. They're in the archive. Calloway nodded. Bring them. We'll compare. The clerk left, and the room held its breath. Vaughn's face had gone pale. Inez felt Jasper's hand brush hers, a fleeting touch of reassurance. The minutes stretched. Then the clerk returned, carrying a heavy ledger. He laid it on the table beside Inez's papers, and Calloway bent over them, tracing entries with a gnarled finger. The silence was suffocating. Finally, Calloway straightened. The handwriting matches. The entries were altered after the original audit. He looked at Vaughn. Mr. Vaughn, do you have an explanation? Vaughn's jaw worked. Those documents are forgeries. Thomas Wade stole those shares and tried to frame me when he got caught. Calloway's eyes were hard. Then explain why your current signature matches the alterations. Vaughn opened his mouth, then closed it. The room erupted again, voices rising in anger and shock. Calloway rapped his gavel. Order. He looked at the marshal, who stood near the door. Marshal, take Mr. Vaughn into custody pending a full investigation. The marshal hesitated, glancing at Vaughn, then stepped forward reluctantly. Vaughn's face twisted. This isn't over, Wade. You think you've won, but you've just made yourself a target. Jasper moved between them, his voice low and deadly. You threaten her again, and I'll finish what her father started. Vaughn glared, then turned and let the marshal lead him out. Inez's knees went weak. She gripped the edge of the table, and Jasper steadied her, his hand at her back. You did it, he murmured. Her throat was too tight to answer. Calloway cleared his throat. Miss Wade, the court will need your full testimony in the coming days. But for now, your father's name is cleared. The room began to empty. People filing out in clusters, their voices loud with gossip and speculation. Inez stayed at the table, her hands shaking, the weight of 5 years lifting like smoke. Jasper guided her outside, into the sunlight. She blinked, her eyes wet, and he handed her his handkerchief. Take a minute. She wiped her face, then looked at him. Thank you. For everything. He shook his head. You did the hard part. I just stood there and looked intimidating. She laughed, a shaky sound that broke into something deeper. You were more than intimidating. You were the reason I didn't run. He held her gaze, and the noise of the square faded. You're not running now, are you? She shook her head. No. I'm staying. I'm going to rebuild what my father lost. Clear the rest of the lies. Make this place remember him the right way. He smiled. Then you'll need help. I know a horse trainer who's decent with a hammer. She felt warmth spread through her chest. I might take you up on that. They walked together through town, past the saloon, the land office, the livery. People stared, but the stares had changed. There was curiosity now, respect, even grudging admiration. At the edge of the Silver Ranch, Jasper stopped. I should check on the horses, but I'll see you tonight. At the saloon, she hesitated. I'm done singing for a while. I think I'll take a night off. He grinned. Then how about dinner? My place. Nothing fancy, just stew and bread. But it's quiet. Her heart kicked. I'd like that. He tipped his hat. 6 o'clock. Don't be late. She watched him walk away, his stride easy, his shoulders loose, and felt something settle inside her. Something that felt like the beginning of solid ground. That evening, she walked to the small cabin at the edge of the Silver Ranch where Jasper lived. The sky was streaked with orange and pink, the air cooling. He met her at the door, his sleeves rolled up, his hair damp from washing. Come in. The cabin was small, but clean, with a stone fireplace, a rough table, and a single window overlooking the corrals. A pot simmered on the fire, and the smell of beef and onions made her stomach growl. They ate together, talking easily now, the barriers worn down. She told him about her mother, her brother, the years of silence and shame. He told her about working his way west, the ranches he had lived on, the horses he had trained. By the time the meal was finished, the fire had burned low, and the room was warm and shadowed. Jasper poured coffee, and they sat on the porch, watching the stars come out. Inez took a breath. I keep thinking about what you said, about carrying shame. I've carried it so long, I don't know what it feels like without it. Jasper set his cup down. It feels like this. Quiet. Simple. Like you can breathe all the way down. She looked at him. Is that how you feel now? He met her eyes. When I'm with you, yes. She felt her pulse quicken. Jasper, I need to tell you something. I didn't just come here to clear my father's name. I came here because I was running. From gossip, from grief, from a life that didn't fit anymore. And I told myself I'd fix everything and leave. But now, I don't want to leave. He reached over and took her hand, his thumb brushing her knuckles. Then don't. She looked down at their joined hands. What if people find out who I really am? What if they still don't believe me? He squeezed gently. Then we'll deal with it. Together. You're not alone anymore, Inez. She looked up, her eyes stinging. I don't know how to do this. How to trust someone this much. He smiled. Neither do I. But I'm willing to try if you are. She leaned forward, closing the space between them, and kissed him. It was soft at first, tentative, then deeper, his hand coming up to cradle her jaw. When they broke apart, she was breathless. He rested his forehead against hers. I'm not going anywhere, he murmured. She closed her eyes. Good, because I think I need you. He laughed quietly. I think I need you too. They sat together as the night deepened, the stars wheeling overhead, the distant sound of the horses settling in the corrals. For the first time in 5 years, Inez felt like she could stop running, like she could stay, like she could build something real. The next morning, she woke in her rented room to a knock on the door. She opened it to find Gideon Marsh standing in the hallway, his face tight. Miss Wade, we have a problem. Vaughn made bail. He's out. Her stomach dropped. When? An hour ago. and he's making noise about you and Pruitt. Says you conspired to frame him. The judge is calling for another hearing tomorrow." Inez's hands clenched. He can say whatever he wants. The evidence is real. Marsh nodded. "I believe you. But Vaughn's got money and friends. You need to be ready." She dressed quickly and went to find Jasper. He was at the corrals, working a bay mare, his movements patient and sure. When he saw her face, he stopped. "What happened?" she told him. He listened, his expression hardening. "Then we make sure we're ready." "What do you need?" She thought for a moment. "Witnesses. People who knew my father. People who remember what Vaughn was like back then. If we can build a case that goes beyond the ledgers, Vaughn won't have anywhere to hide." They spent the day tracking down old freight workers, ranchers who had dealt with her father, and clerks who remembered the original investigation. By evening, they had 6 people willing to testify. It wasn't much, but it was enough to show a pattern. Jasper rode with her to each meeting, standing at her shoulder, his presence steady and unshakable. By the time they returned to town, the sun was setting, and Inez felt exhausted but grounded. That night, they sat together in the cabin again, reviewing the testimony, planning the next day's approach. Inez looked up from her notes. "Do you ever wonder if this is worth it? Fighting this hard for a name?" Jasper met her eyes. "Every name is worth fighting for if it's yours. Your father deserved better. So do you." She felt tears prick her eyes and looked away. He reached across the table and took her hand. "Hey, look at me." She did. "You're going to win this. Not because the evidence is perfect, but because you're telling the truth. And people recognize that, even when they don't want to." She nodded, her throat tight. The next morning, they walked together into the courthouse. The room was even more crowded than before, the air thick with anticipation. Vaughn sat at the front, his lawyer beside him, his expression calm and confident. Inez took her seat at the witness table, Jasper sitting directly behind her. Calloway entered, and the room fell silent. "Let's proceed." Vaughn's lawyer stood first, a slick man in a tailored suit. "Your Honor, my client has been the victim of a targeted campaign by Miss Wade, who is motivated by personal vendetta and financial gain. We have testimony that she broke into his office, stole private documents, and falsified evidence to support her claims." He gestured toward Inez. "This is not justice. This is revenge." Inez felt her pulse spike, but she forced herself to stay calm. Calloway looked at her. "Miss Wade, you'll have a chance to respond. But first, I want to hear from the witnesses." One by one, the freight workers and ranchers took the stand. They testified about her father's honesty, Vaughn's reputation for shady dealings, and the suspicious timing of the accusations. One man, a silver-haired rancher named Holt, spoke with quiet conviction. "Thomas Wade was the most honest man I knew. If he said Vaughn was crooked, I believed him. Still do." When the last witness finished, Calloway leaned back. "Mr. Vaughn, do you wish to testify?" Vaughn stood, his face smooth. "Your Honor, I have nothing to hide. Thomas Wade stole those shares because he was desperate. He had debts, a sick wife, and a failing business. I tried to help him, and he repaid me by trying to destroy my name. When he disappeared, I assumed he had run. I had no idea his daughter would come back years later with forged documents and a pack of lies. Inez felt rage rise in her chest, but Jasper's hand touched her shoulder, grounding her. Calloway looked at the ledgers again. Mr. Vaughn, the handwriting analysis shows these entries were altered. How do you explain that? Vaughn shrugged. Miss Wade could have hired someone to copy my handwriting. It's not difficult. Calloway's eyes narrowed. That's a serious accusation. Do you have proof? Vaughn hesitated. I have character witnesses who will attest to my honesty. Calloway shook his head. I've heard enough. The evidence, while obtained improperly, is corroborated by multiple witnesses and forensic analysis. Mr. Vaughn, you are hereby charged with fraud, theft, and obstruction of justice. Bail is revoked. The room erupted. Vaughn's face twisted with fury. He lunged toward Inez, but the marshal grabbed him, and Jasper was already on his feet, moving between them. Vaughn spat. You think you've won, but you've just signed your death warrant, Wade. Jasper's voice was cold. Try it, and you'll be the one buried. The marshal dragged Vaughn out, and the room slowly emptied. Inez sat frozen, her hands shaking. Calloway cleared his throat. Miss Wade, the court formally clears your father's name. The record will be amended, and restitution proceedings will begin. You are free to go. She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. Thank you. Outside, the sunlight was blinding. Jasper guided her to a bench and sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders. She leaned into him, her body shaking with relief and exhaustion. We did it, she whispered. He kissed the top of her head. You did it. I just kept you from getting shot. She laughed, a broken sound, and wiped her face. What happens now? He pulled back to look at her. Now you rebuild. You clear the rest of your father's debts. You make this town remember him the right way. And you stop running. She met his eyes. And you? What do you do? He smiled. I stay. I keep training horses. I build something that's mine. And I spend every evening I can with a woman who's braver than anyone I've ever met. Her breath caught. Jasper, I don't know how to do this. How to be someone's partner. I've been alone so long. He cupped her face in his hands. Then we learned together. No expectations, no rush, just two people who trust each other. She closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. I can do that. He kissed her, slow and gentle, and she felt the last of her walls crumble. When they pulled apart, she was smiling. Let's go home. He raised an eyebrow. Yours or mine? She laughed. Yours. It's quieter. They walked together through town, ignoring the stairs, and Inez felt lighter than she had in years. The weight of her father's name had been lifted. The lies had been exposed. And she had found something she hadn't expected. A man who saw her for who she was, and stood beside her anyway. Over the following weeks, Inez worked to settle her father's affairs. She sold the remaining freight inventory, paid off his debts, and donated the surplus to the church. She also started singing again, not at the saloon, but at town gatherings. Her voice clear and strong. Jasper finished training the bay mare and moved on to a trio of colts brought in from a neighboring ranch. Inez watched him work from the fence rail, marveling at his patience. the way he read each horse's fear and coaxed them past it. In the evenings they cooked together, talked late into the night, and slowly built a life that felt solid. One evening, as they sat on the porch, Jasper turned to her. "I've been thinking. About buying a piece of land. Starting my own place. Nothing big, just a few acres and a barn. Somewhere I can train horses without answering to anyone else." Inez looked at him. "That sounds perfect." He hesitated. "I want you to be part of it. If you're willing." She felt her heart skip. "Jasper, are you asking me to move in with you?" He smiled. "Eventually. But first, I'm asking if you want to build something together. A ranch. A life. Whatever shape it takes." She reached for his hand. "Yes, I want that." He exhaled, relief and joy crossing his face. "Then we'll start looking tomorrow." They found a plot of land east of town, near the creek where they had camped that first night. It was wild and overgrown, but it had good water, shelter from the wind, and a view that stretched for miles. They spent the next months clearing brush, building a small barn, and fencing a corral. Inez worked beside him, her hands blistered and her back aching, but she had never felt more alive. The townspeople watched with curiosity at first, then with respect. Slowly, the whispers about her father faded, replaced by talk of the Wade Pruitt Ranch and the horses Jasper trained there. One evening, as they stood together watching the sunset, Jasper turned to her. "I need to ask you something." She looked at him. "What?" He took a breath. "Inez Wade, will you marry me?" Her heart stopped. She stared at him, and he smiled nervously. "I know we said no rush, but I don't want to wait anymore. I want to build this life with you, officially. I want everyone to know you're mine and I'm yours." She felt tears sting her eyes. Yes, I'll marry you." He pulled her into his arms, and she kissed him, fierce and joyful. When they pulled apart, he was grinning. "We'll do it simple. Just us, the preacher, and maybe a few witnesses." She laughed. Perfect. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church at the edge of town. Inez wore a new dress, pale ivory with lace trim, and Jasper wore a clean shirt and his best coat. Gideon Marsh stood as witness, along with Holt and a handful of ranch hands. The ceremony was short, the vows spoken clearly, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Jasper kissed her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. They held a small gathering at the ranch afterward, with food, music, and laughter. Inez danced with Jasper under the stars, her head on his shoulder, and felt a happiness so complete it almost frightened her. "This is real," she whispered. He tightened his arms around her. "It is. And it's ours." They stayed on the ranch that night, lying together in the small cabin they had built, the fire crackling softly. Jasper traced patterns on her shoulder. "Do you ever think about your father? About what he'd say if he could see you now?" She was quiet for a moment. "I think he'd be proud. I think he'd say I did what he couldn't. I finished the fight." Jasper kissed her forehead. He'd be right. She closed her eyes, letting the warmth and safety settle over her. For the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged somewhere, not because of a name or a reputation, but because she had chosen it, because she had fought for it, and because she had someone beside her who would fight just as hard. The months passed, and the ranch grew. They added another corral, a second barn, and a small garden. Inez started keeping chickens, and Jasper trained more horses than he could handle alone, so they hired a young hand named Sam to help. The townspeople stopped treating them like outsiders and started treating them like neighbors. Inez sang at the church socials, and Jasper became known as the best horse trainer in the territory. Life was hard, but it was theirs. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set, Inez rested her head on Jasper's shoulder. "Do you ever miss the old life? The one before all this?" He shook his head. "Not for a second. This is the life I was supposed to have. I just had to find the right person to build it with." She smiled. "I feel the same way." He kissed the top of her head. "Then we're exactly where we're supposed to be." A year later, Inez discovered she was pregnant. She told Jasper one morning as they worked in the barn, her voice shaking with nerves and excitement. He stared at her for a moment, then broke into the widest smile she had ever seen. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing. "We're going to be parents." She laughed too, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, we are." He set her down gently, his hands on her waist. "I'm going to build a crib, and a bigger house, and whatever else you need." She kissed him. "I just need you." The pregnancy was difficult at times, but Jasper was attentive and patient, refusing to let her overwork herself. They expanded the cabin into a small house, adding a bedroom and a nursery. The townspeople brought gifts, blankets, and advice. When the baby arrived in early spring, a healthy boy with Jasper's hazel eyes and Inez's dark hair, they named him Thomas, after her father. Jasper held his son for the first time with tears in his eyes. "He's perfect." Inez smiled, exhausted but radiant. "He is." As Thomas grew, the ranch became a home in every sense. Inez taught him songs, and Jasper taught him to ride. They worked together, raised their son together, and built a life that felt unshakable. One evening, when Thomas was 3, Inez stood on the porch watching him chase chickens in the yard, while Jasper mended a fence. She felt a swell of gratitude so strong it brought tears to her eyes. Jasper looked up and saw her expression. "You all right?" She nodded. "Better than all right. I was just thinking about how far we've come. From that first day in the square to this. It feels like a lifetime." He walked over and wrapped an arm around her waist. "It was a lifetime. The one we were meant to live." She leaned into him. "Do you ever regret it? Any of it?" He shook his head. "Not one second. Every hard moment. Every fight. Every risk. It brought me here. To you. To him." He nodded toward Thomas, who was now digging in the dirt with a stick. She smiled. "I love you, Jasper Pruitt." He kissed her temple. "I love you too, Inez Pruitt. And I always will." The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The ranch was quiet, except for the sound of Thomas's laughter and the distant call of a hawk. Inez stood with her husband on the porch of the home they had built together, and felt the kind of peace that comes from knowing you are exactly where you are meant to be. The past was behind them, cleared and forgiven. The future stretched ahead, full of possibility. And the present, this moment, was everything they had fought for. They had started as strangers bound by scandal and secrets. They had become partners, then lovers, then husband and wife. And now they were a family, rooted in land they had claimed and love they had earned. The singer who testified against a ghost had found her voice. The horse trainer who carried his father's shame had found his name. And together, they had found home. Years passed, and the ranch became known throughout the territory. Jasper's reputation as a trainer brought buyers from as far as Cheyenne, and Inez's garden and livestock provided steady income. Thomas grew into a bright, curious child who loved horses and stories in equal measure. Inez told him about his grandfather, the honest man who had been wronged, and Jasper taught him the value of patience and hard work. The boy grew up, knowing he was loved, knowing his family had fought for the life they had, and knowing that truth and courage mattered more than reputation. One summer evening, when Thomas was 6, a traveler stopped at the ranch asking for water. Inez recognized him immediately. It was the clerk from the land office, Burris, now graying and bent. He looked at her with weary eyes. "Miss White. I mean, Mrs. Pruitt. I heard you were doing well." She poured him a cup of water. "We are. What brings you here?" He hesitated. "I wanted to apologize for not standing up back then. When your father was accused, I knew Vaughn was dirty, but I was afraid. I let fear keep me silent. And that cost your family everything." Inez looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "I appreciate that. It takes courage to admit a mistake." He exhaled. "I just wanted you to know. Your father would be proud of what you've built." She felt her throat tighten. "Thank you." He finished his water, tipped his hat, and rode away. Jasper came up beside her. "You all right?" She nodded. "Yes. I think I finally am." He kissed her cheek. "Good, because we have a son to put to bed and a life to live." She smiled. "Let's do that." They walked inside together, and Inez tucked Thomas into his bed, singing him the same lullaby her mother had sung to her. When she finished, Thomas looked up at her with sleepy eyes. "Mama, Papa says you were brave once. Is that true?" She smoothed his hair. "I had to be. But the bravest thing I ever did was trust your father." Thomas yawned. "I'm going to be brave too." She kissed his forehead. "I know you will. Sleep now." She joined Jasper by the fire, and they sat together in comfortable silence. The crackling flames cast warm light on the walls, and the house felt solid and safe. Jasper took her hand. "Do you think Thomas will understand when he's older what we went through to get here?" Inez squeezed his hand. "I think he'll understand that love is worth fighting for, that family is worth fighting for, and that sometimes the hardest battles are the ones that make you who you're supposed to be." Jasper smiled. "That's all I want him to know." They sat until the fire burned low, then went to bed. Inez lay in Jasper's arms, listening to his steady breathing, and felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. She had come to Broken Fork as a woman running from shame, hiding behind a false name, desperate to clear a debt she hadn't owed. She had found a man who saw through her masks, who stood beside her when it cost him, who built a life with her, brick by brick. And she had learned that trust was not a gift you gave lightly, but a choice you made every day. A choice to be vulnerable, To be honest, to let someone see you fully and love you anyway. The next morning, she woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of Thomas laughing in the yard. She dressed and went outside to find Jasper teaching their son to saddle a pony. Thomas was concentrating hard, his small hands fumbling with the girth strap. Jasper guided him patiently. That's it. Tighten it just a bit more. Good. Now check it. Thomas tugged the strap and grinned. I did it. Jasper ruffled his hair. You sure did. Now let's see if you can lead him around the corral. Inez watched them, her heart full. This was the life she had fought for. Not grand or glamorous, but real. Rooted in honesty, built on trust, and filled with the kind of love that didn't need words. She walked over and kissed Jasper's cheek. Morning. He smiled. Morning. Sleep well? She nodded. Better than ever. He took her hand, and they stood together watching their son lead the pony in careful circles. You ever think about what we'd tell our younger selves if we could go back? She considered. I'd tell mine that the hardest road leads to the best destination, and that sometimes the person you need most shows up when you least expect it. Jasper nodded. I'd tell mine that running from your past doesn't work. You have to face it, own it, and build something better. And that the right partner makes all the difference. She leaned her head on his shoulder. We were lucky. He kissed the top of her head. We were brave. There's a difference. She smiled. Maybe both. They stood together as the morning sun climbed higher, the ranch coming to life around them, and Inez felt a deep, abiding certainty. This was home, not because of the land or the house, but because of the man beside her, and the child in the corral, and the life they had chosen together. A life built on truth, defended with courage, and held together by love. The kind of love that didn't need to be perfect, just persistent. The kind that showed up every day and said, I'm here. I'm staying. I choose you. And that, she thought, was worth every risk she had ever taken. As the seasons turned, the ranch became more than just a home. It became a legacy. Thomas grew strong and capable, learning to train horses under his father's guidance and to manage the land with his mother's practicality. Inez and Jasper aged together, their love deepening with every shared challenge and quiet evening. They faced droughts, harsh winters, and the occasional trouble from neighboring ranches, but they faced it together, and that made all the difference. The townspeople came to respect them, not just for what they had overcome, but for the quiet strength they brought to Broken Fork. One autumn evening, when Thomas was 16 and already working the ranch like a partner, Inez and Jasper sat on the porch, as they had 1,000 times before. The air was crisp, the sky painted in shades of gold and crimson. Jasper looked at her, his face lined now, but his eyes still bright. Do you have any regrets? She thought for a moment. Not a single one. Every hard moment brought me here, to you, to this. He nodded slowly. I feel the same. We built something good, Inez, something that will last. She took his hand. We did. And it's not over yet. He smiled. No, it's not. They sat in silence, watching the sun sink below the hills, and Inez felt a profound gratitude. For the man beside her, for the life they had built, for the son who would carry their story forward. She had come to Broken Fork seeking justice for her father, and she had found it. But she had also found something more. She had found herself. She had found love. She had found home. And she had learned that the greatest victories are not won in courtrooms or public squares, but in the quiet moments when you choose to trust, to stay, to build. When you choose to fight, not just for a name, but for a life worth living. The stars began to appear, one by one, scattered across the vast western sky. Inez leaned into Jasper, and he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. The night was cool. The world was wide, and they were exactly where they were meant to be. Together. Always together. And that, Inez thought, was the truest kind of freedom. Not the freedom to run, but the freedom to stay. To stand your ground, to clear your name, and to build a life that was wholly, fiercely yours. She had done that. They had done that. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The years continued to pass, each one adding another layer to the story of the Wade Pruitt Ranch. Thomas married a girl from a neighboring ranch, a spirited young woman named Clara, who reminded Inez of herself at that age. They had children, 2 daughters and a son, and the ranch filled with laughter and energy again. Jasper taught his grandchildren to ride, just as he had taught Thomas. And Inez told them stories of their great-grandfather, the honest man who had been wronged, and the long journey to set things right. One spring morning, Inez and Jasper stood together at the edge of their land, looking out over fields that stretched to the horizon. Jasper's hair was almost entirely gray now, his face deeply lined. But his hands were still strong, and his eyes still held that steady light. Inez's hair was silver, her face marked by time, but her posture was straight, her voice clear. "We did it," she said quietly. "We built something that will last." Jasper nodded. "We did, and our grandchildren will build on it. That's how it's supposed to work." She turned to him. "Do you remember that first day, in the square, when you stood up for me?" He smiled. "I remember thinking you looked like you were about to take on the whole town by yourself. And I thought, that's a woman worth knowing." She laughed. "I was terrified." He pulled her close. "So was I. But we did it anyway." She rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. That's the secret, isn't it? Being brave even when you're terrified. He kissed the top of her head. That's the only kind of brave that matters. They stood together as the sun climbed higher, warming the land, and Inez felt a peace so complete, it was almost like grace. She had come to Broken Fork as a fugitive from shame, and she had left as a woman who knew her worth. She had found a man who saw her, truly saw her, and chose to stand beside her through every storm. And together, they had built a life that was rich not in wealth, but in love, in trust, in the quiet certainty that they were exactly where they belonged. As the sun reached its zenith, Thomas called from the house. "Ma, Pa, lunch is ready." They turned and walked back together, their steps slower now, but still in sync. The house was full of noise and warmth, children running through the rooms, Clara setting the table, Thomas laughing at something one of the girls said. Inez and Jasper sat at the head of the table, surrounded by the family they had built, and she felt tears prick her eyes. Jasper squeezed her hand under the table. "You all right?" She nodded. "More than all right. I'm happy." After lunch, the family gathered on the porch, and Thomas asked his father to tell the story of how he and Inez had met. Jasper glanced at Inez, and she nodded. He cleared his throat. Well, it started with an auction, and a man who didn't know when to keep his mouth shut. The children leaned in, listening raptly, and Jasper told the story with humor and honesty, not shying away from the hard parts, the fear, the risk, the moments when it all could have gone wrong. When he finished, the youngest granddaughter looked up at Inez. "Grandma, were you really that brave?" Inez smiled. "I had to be. But I wasn't alone. Your grandfather was right there with me." The girl nodded, satisfied, and ran off to play. Clara came to sit beside Inez. "You two really built something special." Inez looked at her. "We built it together. That's the key. It's not one person carrying the load. It's both of you, lifting together." Clara smiled. "I'll remember that." Inez patted her hand. "I know you will." As the afternoon wore on, the family scattered to their tasks, and Inez and Jasper found themselves alone on the porch again. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in shades of rose and amber. Jasper took her hand. "I've been thinking. About how lucky I am. How lucky we are to have had this. All of it." Inez squeezed his hand. "Luck had nothing to do with it. We chose this. Every day, we chose each other." He nodded. "And I'd choose you again. Every time." She felt tears sting her eyes. "I love you, Jasper. I've loved you since that first day, even when I didn't know it yet." He smiled. "I know. I felt the same. We were meant to find each other, Inez. Meant to build this life." She leaned into him. "I believe that." They sat as the sun set, the world turning golden, then violet, then deep blue. The stars emerged, bright and steady, and the air filled with the sounds of evening. The distant call of an owl, the rustle of wind through the trees, the soft murmur of voices inside the house. Inez closed her eyes and felt the weight of a life well lived settle over her like a blanket. She had fought for her father's name, and she had won. She had trusted a stranger, and he had become her everything. She had built a home, raised a son, and left a legacy that would endure. And in the end, that was all anyone could ask for. Not perfection, but presence. Not ease, but effort. Not a life without struggle, but a life where the struggle was shared, where the victories were earned, and where love was not just a feeling, but a choice made again and again, every single day. Inez opened her eyes and looked at Jasper. His face was peaceful, his eyes on the horizon, and she knew he was thinking the same thing. This was it. This was the life they had fought for. And it was beautiful. Many years later, when Inez was in her 70s and Jasper in his late 70s, they sat together on the same porch on a summer evening. Jasper's health had been declining, and Inez had been caring for him with the same fierce devotion she had brought to every other challenge. He looked at her, his eyes still bright despite the years. "No regrets, Inez." She shook her head. "Not one." He smiled. "Good. Because I've had the best life a man could ask for. And it's all because of you." She took his hand, her voice thick. "You gave me everything, Jasper. A home, a family, a reason to stop running. He squeezed her hand weakly. We gave each other that. That's what love is. Not one person saving the other, but both of them building something together. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I know. And I'm so grateful. He closed his eyes, his breathing slow and steady. Stay with me. She leaned close, her forehead against his. Always. I'm not going anywhere. They sat like that as the sun set one last time, the sky blazing with color. And Inez felt his hand relax in hers. She held him as his breathing slowed, then stopped, and the world went silent. She sat with him for a long time, tears falling, but her heart was not broken. It was full of gratitude, full of love, full of the life they had shared. When Thomas found her, he wrapped his arms around her, and she let herself lean into him. He's gone, she whispered. Thomas nodded. I know, Ma. But he's not really gone. He's in all of this. The ranch. Us. Everything. She looked around at the land they had built, the family they had raised, and she knew Thomas was right. Jasper was everywhere. In the corrals he had mended, the horses he had trained, the house he had expanded, the love he had given so freely, and he was in her heart, where he would stay until her last breath. She lived for several more years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, telling stories, passing down wisdom, and tending the ranch with the same care she always had. And when her time came, she went peacefully, in the same house where she had loved and laughed and built a life worth living. The Wade Pruitt Ranch endured, passed down through generations, each one adding their own chapter to the story. And in the town of Broken Fork, the legend of Inez Wade and Jasper Pruitt became the kind of story people told around fires and at gatherings. The singer who testified against a ghost, the horse trainer who stood beside her, the couple who fought for truth, built a life on trust, and loved each other with a fierceness that changed everything. It was a story of the Old West, raw and real, full of danger and hardship and triumph. But more than that, it was a story of two people who refused to be defined by their past, who chose each other against all odds, and who built something beautiful in the wild, untamed frontier. And that, in the end, was the greatest story of all.